Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome as you start coming in on Substack, on Twitch, on YouTube. Let me turn on Facebook if it lets me, because why not? Good morning. I'm Nick Pero. This is Banner and Backbone, and we are, and I am joined today for the window of discussion by Joe Plensler, a U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran and friend of mine at this point now, or new friend of mine after a couple interviews. And you've been on Banner and Backbone with the Anti-Fascist Book Club before, and I'm hoping to see you more there. Like I've told you before, you have an open invite back. I really enjoyed the conversation with you, and I know everybody else did. And I think you'll be a great addition to our book club whenever you want to be able to come. And so, Joe, welcome to the window of discussion. We have a lot to talk about. There was some obviously really heavy news this weekend that we are going to be discussing, and the response to Alex Preddy's murder. And what has happened in America since then. And Joe, so I want to give you a little bit of the floor here to introduce yourself for everyone in the audience as people start coming on in. And then we'll get into our discussion today.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. It's good to see you. It's good to be back. My name's Joe. I'm like you said, Marine Corps combat veteran. And today I am a certified examiner of what I do to put a roof over my belly every day. I've been working in PR and communication and coaching for almost 3 decades now. And so I also teach at our local university here. I teach at GW, just a few select classes, not a PhD professor. I'm kind of more of a professor of practice, I guess you'd say. Really am active in helping our nation to navigate what lies in front of us, I guess would be the best way to put it. And I think I was talking to a friend yesterday about speaking up and speaking out, and kind of reflected back to my first experience with that, which was protesting the Ku Klux Klan marching through our college town in 1990, spring of 1990. And that experience taught me that sometimes you literally have to put your body where your values lie. At some points in history, if it's a matter of principle, you have to assume some personal risk, right? And we're seeing that on the streets of Minneapolis today, to get to the point. I just got a text from a college friend of mine this morning who lives in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and she's just like, man, I couldn't be more proud of the citizens of our city standing up for our democracy, our republic, our constitutional rights, and not tolerating this abuse by the federal government and not being intimidated, right? And I think, I also do a lot of work with the media. I spent 5 years in the Pentagon working for the Commandant of the Marine Corps, working with the Pentagon Press Corps every day, or what used to be the Pentagon Press Corps. Now it's just a bunch of sycophants sitting in the building. So how all this plays out on cameras, how all this media is consumed around the country, and ultimately how our fellow citizens, all 330 million plus of them, are constructing the reality about what's going on in Minneapolis and what it means for them and their localities. So I know I kind of threw a lot out on the table there initially. It's probably more than you wanted, but
no, I think it's great.
Okay.
I appreciate all of that background too for you, for both for me, but for everyone else. I'll have to get you in contact with Frederick Pogue. He's a Marine vet also, and he focuses a lot on masculinity and better humaning, and better manning. He fits in with a lot of the work that I do on the Sick of This Shit publication side for the intelligent masculinity stuff. I actually interviewed him yesterday. You'd really enjoy his discussion and getting to meet him. So I'll have him join us. I'll introduce you to him and connect you sometime soon.
That'd be fantastic. I just did a Substack about the war on empathy and how it just doesn't make any sense. Like, you cannot literally lead other people.
Oh yeah, like toxic empathy. What the hell is that?
Yeah.
Like, I'm so excited to get you on for an intelligent masculinity interview too, because your better humaning coaching and experiences are incredibly valuable right now. And to be honest, I think one of the ways we win our
Mhm.
democracy back is the better humaning experiment that we're doing right now and the social experiment that we're doing right now to fix our cultural side for
Yeah.
men and masculinity and break this toxic cycle. And so there's been a couple things that have happened in Minnesota recently, and that
Mhm.
I definitely want to get your thoughts and opinions on. Um, I do actually. I want to start with what happened yesterday with
Mhm.
Representative Ilhan Omar.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I just saw that.
was sprayed with some sort of chemical. I haven't looked into who the individual was that sprayed her. To be
Mhm.
honest, I don't care their identity.
Mhm.
I don't want to make them famous for this act of violence.
Yeah.
Elon Omar was attacked by someone with a chemical, and she responded in strength, not
Oh
in
yeah,
violence, but in words, in
for
my
sure.
opinion. And I want to get your thoughts on that and like how that plays into what we need to be doing right now in this moment as individuals and as communities.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I appreciated her bravery and her courage in that moment. Right, she wasn't scared, she wasn't flustered, and she went straight back into engaging with the audience and talking about the things that she showed up to talk about. And I think what that reminded me, and what the text from my friend in Minneapolis reminded me of, and just watching the news and watching the videos of everyday citizens out on the streets refusing to accept that kind of governing in their state, um, is that it takes individual courage. And when people stand up, it's like the playground bully, right? The bully's going to bully kids all along and steal their lunch and step on their, kick their lunchbox down the sidewalk until somebody stands up and punches them in the face, right? And then they think twice.
Yeah.
And then when it's like one person, then it becomes three, then it becomes five, then it becomes seven, and they just reset the norms and say, hey, we're not tolerating this bullshit. And we are taxpayers, we're citizens, and we demand better from our federal government, because this is not the America or the version of America that any of us signed up for, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think about, like, if we didn't have video, right? If say this happened 30 years ago before cell phones were ubiquitous, we would have had a few stories that would have come out through probably police and government sources, to a limited number of newspapers, a few TV stations locally, and the federal government would have had a tremendous ability to spin this, their own narrative of reality. The beauty of having so many citizens out on the streets recording ICE actions is that it gives the lie to all this bullshit that, from Christine Oman down, Stephen Miller, when they're characterizing these folks as domestic terrorists as an excuse to inflict violence upon us, right? It's like the default setting. You stand against us, ergo you're a domestic terrorist. No, we stand against you because we're decent people who believe in the rule of law. We believe in not being abused by the police. We believe in all of our constitutional rights, to include the Fourth Amendment, right, Fifth Amendment, Second Amendment, First Amendment, and it's just kind of, rights exist as words on a piece of paper. They don't defend themselves. It takes people to do that, right? It takes institutions
Yeah.
to do that. It takes us to hold those who we have entrusted with power, um, to account, right? Because this all goes back to the social contract. Like, when you think about it, why do any of us comport with social norms and not just do whatever the hell we want to do, right? Your neighbor's got something you like, why don't you just go over there and take it, right? And if you're more powerful and have more force and more guns, the might makes right world that humans have lived in for millennia, isn't such a pretty place to live in, right? And we
Yeah.
only obey the law because the government is bound to the law, right? That's the
And
only
the law
reason.
is only enforced by the people in the end. Like,
Yeah, right. By holding
because,
holding leaders accountable, right?
yeah. And
Um,
I think so. To interrupt just real quick here, is I
yeah,
think you're making some really good points on like the accountability of law and the account and how we uphold the systems and norms, and
mhm,
our own social contracts. And one of those social contracts is that's being tested right now is, and this is in response to the gun ownership part, not so much the Elon Omar part, because I want to be clear
yeah,
on my thoughts on the Elon Omar part first.
mhm,
Is I think that was caused by Donald Trump's violent rhetoric that he used
mhm,
on Truth Social, where he blamed Elon Omar specifically for fraud and called her whatever nonsense, and then she was attacked.
Right.
And so I see a direct correlation between the leader's words and the underling's actions. Even if he did not specifically say attack her,
Mhm.
they know what he means.
Yeah.
And so we're at a point too, and I want to loop this into the Second Amendment piece of this, because
Yeah.
that's a really important topic. And I advocate that people don't bring guns to these protests,
Yeah.
because I think that just makes it escalatory just in by nature,
Mhm.
even if you don't mean to. And it puts other communities at risk, because if you make a shot, you have to be willing to speak for everyone in the nation when you fire that trigger as a
Yeah.
civilian, because the next step becomes really problematic. So what are your thoughts on, like, Alex Preddy had a concealed carry permit.
Mhm.
He did not have his weapon in his hand. His
Yep.
hands were very clearly visible with cameras, and then he was disarmed and murdered.
Right.
What do you think, though, about the, like, bringing a weapon to, or your thoughts on that, to protests, and how do we, depending on your answer, how do we safeguard ourselves during protests and civic action if we aren't arming ourselves?
Yeah. I don't want to Monday morning quarterback his decision making and doing that. I have seen where it works both positively and negatively both ways, right? Look at the
Yeah.
Black Panther movement back in the 60s, where police were just wantonly abusing the African American community. And then all of a sudden, they started showing up with weapons every time the cops showed up. And all of a sudden, the police got a lot more polite in their
Yeah.
policing, right? We saw it down south in the post Civil War Reconstruction era with the KKK terrorizing people. Then there was a group called the Deacons for Defense, and they armed themselves, and they showed up. And then all of a sudden, the bullshit died down, right? Because there was a threat of violence. So it was like the perpetrators didn't have the monopoly on the use of force anymore, and it readjusted the calculus. Strangely, the the Republican Party and the NRA got really interested in gun control after the Black Panthers started showing up at the state capitol in California.
Yeah,
Um,
I do remember that. Like,
yeah,
white people can have guns, but black people can't,
yeah,
was
yeah.
was a
So
response.
you've got armed militia guys showing up in the Michigan State House in numbers, like a whole
Yeah.
platoon of guys with AR-15s. Nothing happened to them, right? Nothing happened to them. They weren't even charged. Weren't even
Mhm.
charged, and their whole point was to show up to intimidate lawmakers. So I think we all need to address our own security needs based on our own risk assessment, right? Um, I think that's an individual decision, but also knowing a couple things. One, do you ratchet up the potential for escalation? Yes. Do you also have the means to defend yourself? Yes, and other people, right? So, um, my take, right? And I think going back to my time in combat and these kind of almost tongue-in-cheek Marine Corps rules for gunfighting. One of the most important one is a lifelong commitment to deterrence and de-escalation is your probably fastest way of not getting shot. You know,
Yeah.
so I believe in that. I think where you can take the peaceable course of action, you're typically better served, right? But then again, we've seen people who have done that. Renee Good was not armed; she was murdered.
Yeah.
Alex Preddy was armed and he was murdered, right? So, yeah, it's complicated for me, right?
Yeah.
But
So
here's
here's
the
a
other thing too:
question.
is like it's
Oh
not
yeah,
enough
go
just to
ahead.
have it. You need to know the law in your state
Mhm.
and in your city or your county. You need to be trained, right? Because the worst thing you could do is pull that thing and shoot somebody that doesn't need to be shot. It's just kind of like, it's not as simple as just showing up with a weapon, right? Like, this whole debate about, oh, we should arm teachers, in schools to prevent mass shootings. And I'm like, do you know how hard it is to shoot accurately in a chaotic situation where tons of people are running around, shoot, don't shoot considerations? Like, it's
And
not,
what happens if a kid gets that gun?
oh, yeah,
Like, what happens if a
100%.
kid accidentally gets that gun and fires it off? Like,
Yeah.
that
I mean,
nobody ever talks about that side effect.
that's right. And how much training do SWAT teams need? Do, tier
Mhm.
one special operators need to be that sharp to shoot accurately only shoot the threat targets, not shoot the non-threat targets, and have a successful resolution. Pretty complicated, pretty dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, you
And
go
and
through a
if
lot of training in the military and true
that's right.
policing and true
Yeah.
police forcing to actually fire your weapons correctly. You go through a
Mhm.
lot of it. You have to qualify. You have to maintain that qualification. You have to go through additional firearms courses and handling courses and training courses. And then you have to
Mhm.
requalify on those weapons and show that you can maintain those proficiencies. And then you do training simulations. Like, if this was real policing, they would
Mhm.
be trained and properly tooled to do the job. But
And show their freaking faces,
yes, yeah,
right? Like, we served in the military. You know, when I was in both Iraq and Afghanistan, the only time you covered your mouth or your face was to prevent dust from getting in there, either on long convoys when you're an exposed, turd of a
yep,
vehicle like a Humvee, upgun Humvee, or just with those sandstorms that would whip through the area, right? Anytime we interacted with people, especially local people, we would take off our sunglasses and take off our helmets so they could look into our eyes and see us as human
yep,
beings, not as these big green Kevlar clad robots that were scary, right? For sure, right?
yeah,
Um, so we know from a lot of research in psychology that when people have the sense of anonymity, they're much more inclined to act on their worst instincts. And we're
yeah.
seeing that in the way these federal agents are comporting themselves in communities all around the country, right?
So this gives
It,
me a perfect opportunity to ask the question: is the
yeah.
response that happened in Minnesota with the National Guard? I think it was too. I think I had. I hope going forward, other governors call up their national guards at this point and do
Mhm.
what Minnesota just did. Was what do you see about how do you feel about the response that Minnesota just had with the National Guard, where they came out unmasked, clear, green Kevlar or bright green vests on,
Yeah.
reflective vests on, showing their faces, handing out hot chocolate and snacks and like hand warmers and things to the community, showing that they're there to protect the community. How do you
Yeah.
see that type of response being commingled into actions like what are happening in Philadelphia right now, where the Black Panthers are actively out
Mhm.
guarding and supporting their neighborhoods and protecting and saying, hey, we're gun owners too, and we
That's
are
right.
not afraid of you. How do
Mhm.
you see things like that working together to
Yeah.
make safer systems of support on a state to like community level? Because we know the feds right now, and I was never a states' rights person. Like
Mhm.
I've always been just a good mix of federalism, but not like
Mhm.
acutely state right or fed right. Now we're seeing what oppressive federalism looks like
That's right.
and what the need for some states' rights are. How do you see those
Mhm.
commingling to create these systems that we need for protection?
Yeah, and I think what's the both and solution here is what I'd be driving at, because to me I think the National Guard is there to protect the people of their state, right, to assist them in times of disaster, to be deployed in extremis, like when our nation's at war and we don't have enough active duty troops to do what we need to do. I think that's the right approach. It shows that the state, the taxpayers of the state of Minnesota who are funding their National Guard are getting the services that they would expect from the National Guard to protect them, right? To protect them.
Yeah.
And really, when, from the perspective of people in Minneapolis and St. Paul, I just got a text from my friend in the morning. Like, these federal agents aren't seen as law enforcement officers, they're seen as invaders.
Yeah.
They're seen as abusive invaders who do not respect the rights of the people there. And I got to tell you, like, what tells me that this approach is less about actual law enforcement and more about intimidation and propaganda and political means is that if ICE was only going after hardened criminals who are here illegally, getting the murderers, drug dealers, rapists, violent people off the streets, and that was it, they probably wouldn't have nearly as much resistance as they do, but they're not. They're going after, the construction worker. They're going after the waiter or the dishwasher. They're going after, people in largely service sector jobs all around, our communities who make make things work, like the farmer, the field hands, the rest of it, right? And these are people who are, largely fleeing violence in Central and South America, right? Narco-terrorism largely fueled by U.S. manufactured guns. I think like 50% of the guns recovered in Central and South America in narco-related crime are from the United States, were made here. That violence is being caused by America's insatiable demand for illegal substances, right? If there, it's simple capitalism, like no demand, no supply. So, when we point the finger at Central and South America, we ought to look in the mirror and say, like, what's driving our people to demand all these drugs, right?
Yes.
And what could be done better with drug policy because ultimately the safer we help them make their countries, the less urge people will have to cross borders, right? Like, if I feel safe and secure and well fed and have an opportunity in my own home, in my own country, why would I want to leave? Why would I want to leave my culture and the place that I know and the people I love and my neighbors and all this other stuff, right? Like, it's just kind of like it's counterintuitive. But yeah, so I think but I'm not gonna criticize people who have been historically abused by law enforcement and to some extent National Guards, from not having a whole lot of trust in showing up and defending their own communities. They are exercising their Second Amendment rights and the right to self-defense and preserve their own life, liberty, and property. So, how that's done is a matter of style, I guess, or art, right? It's not a science, but again, I think de-escalation and is the best strategy, but that requires reciprocity, right? If we the people are going to say we want things to remain vocal but peaceful, right? The government's got an obligation to say, and we will follow the law and treat people with dignity and respect.
I think that's a great way to view it. And I want to focus in a little bit on Philadelphia and like that type of environment, because I think that one's a really, really, really important test case of what could be a good way to build relationships and break down the old hatreds or the old distrusts from the past. Is if you were able to give advice to Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania on how to work with the well-regulated militia of the Black Panthers, because they are a well-regulated militia. That's what they are. They have bylaws and they have oaths and they have conduct and they kick people out. They have memberships. They have a structure. They're a well-regulated militia. How could you see, or what would you recommend to Governor Shapiro if you were able to, on how he could work with the Black Panthers in Philadelphia or other areas to remove that old stigma of the National Guard coming in, or state police or local police coming in and being the force of oppression rather than the force of support? What would you say to Governor Shapiro if you could?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to discovering mutual goals and shared expectations, right? And I think that from a leadership perspective, it requires a lot of listening. Like, what are your concerns? It's my duty as governor to keep all the citizens in the state safe, to include the law enforcement, officials that are enforcing our laws, recognizing that, when it comes to law and order, if you typically come from majority group, wealthier communities, you get law. If you come from poorer communities and non-majority group communities, you've got an order, sometimes at the end of a baton, or with a 9mm bullet launched from a police pistol, right? Like Trayvon Martin, Ezel Ford, Michael Brown, like the list goes on and on, right? The thing about trust is, like, say has to equal do over time, which is also complicated by the political process when one party's elected in and another, one is elected out, every 4 years or 8 years. But the relationship between the people and the state is the thing that needs to be maintained across administrations, both Republican and Democrat, or independent for that matter, right? So, it's it's important. We may differ on political views. I think most Americans, when you look at fundamental goals, right, fundamental values, they agree on the what. 96% of the people believe in freedom of speech. More than 90% of the people believe in the right to preserve your own life, liberty, and property, right? All these things. Where people disagree is on the means of the how, right? How are we going to do these things, and who's going to do it? So I think, it's undeniable. If you have a large organized group that's well armed within your state, you probably need to have some sort of communication with them, right? And say, hey, what are you concerned about, right?
Yeah.
I hear you, and this is what we're doing to address those concerns because we want to keep things peaceful, right? And that's the thing. Like, when you look at crisis communication, the fastest way to end a protest or a boycott of your company, your organization, your group, your government, is to remove the cause of the grievance. It's the abuse theory of communication, like interpersonally. Like, you cannot communicate with somebody until the abuse stops. They're not going to hear you. When the brain goes into fight or flight mode, all they hear is wah, 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 right? So yeah, and trust is built over time. It's built in drops and spilled in buckets, and that's the thing. Like, when people are talking about abolishing ICE, yeah, right? Because to a large swath of America, there is no trust or faith in that organization as an enterprise anymore. So if it gets reconstituted, just all under one big border patrol, and they're only allowed to operate within 5 miles of the border, tethered, to pretty tight controls, they have an important job, right? Like, there are people who would want to smuggle bad shit across the borders and traffic people and all this other stuff. I mean, there is an undeniable requirement for that function. I think a country without borders isn't a country at all, right? But with that comes the responsibility to have things like sensible immigration policies, right? Because for most people, the only real difference between a person coming here legally and someone coming here so-called illegally is money, right?
Yeah.
If you've got, a couple million in the bank and you're living in Qatar, boy, is it a lot easier to get here than if you have, maybe a handful of pesos and you're living down in some village in Central or South America, right?
Yep.
Constantly intimidated by gangs and violence and even your own government. So
let's touch on the I think that's really awesome, is the idea of problem solving around the like what you would recommend to Governor Shapiro, or I guess any governor at this point, or any leader, is we need to fix the core problem. And the core problem is there's a lot of racial hatred that has become policy. Like, we are revisiting the KKK platform through Donald Trump and whatever, and this regime that is in there.
Well, it's interesting, right? When you look at the broad arc of history, how many FBI and federal resources were deployed in the 60s to break up the Black Panther Party, and the KKK is alive and kicking today?
Yep.
Just a thought,
we've never addressed it. We've always welcomed back white supremacists, but we've never addressed the flaw of white supremacists. We haven't. But I think as a nation, we've been more forgiving in every sense to white people throughout our entire history, and that's something that we need to reconcile. And I think that's what we're reconciling with right now. I think that's what we're doing, is we're finally reconciling with the Civil War and with the racial hatred, and we're seeing the last gasps of white supremacy, and it always gets worse when a dying beast screams out on its last breaths. Then it gets better, but we have to keep going forward. And I want to touch on your idea of the border patrol reconstitution, because I do absolutely agree. Abolish ICE. There's no trust there. They are a lawless paramilitary group that thinks they're immune from any standard, and they're going around killing people, and they're abusing people, and people are abusing the fact that they wear masks. So they're going out and abusing and capturing and kidnapping and torturing and raping people, because we know that it's happened. We've had reports that things like that have happened. So there is no trust. So on the end of border patrol, because we all agree, ICE needs to go, and there needs to be some really, really, really strict limits. And what you said about the 5 mile limit and a guardrail on that. I've spoken to, and I think you should too, and I'll
Mhm.
is speak to Jen Budd, the former
Mm.
Border Patrol agent. She resigned right around post 9/11, and has been investigating Border Patrol and CBP since then, in the cultural
Yeah.
aspects of that. And she's come out very openly and said one of the onboarding hazing things that they do if you are a female agent is you get raped.
Hmm.
And the prevalence and the use of dehumanization is baked into the system.
Yeah.
So and like the way they talk about their Hispanic colleagues is like they use the word tonk because that's
Mhm.
the sound a flashlight makes when it hits someone's head. Specifically, when it hits a Hispanic person's head, is where it comes from. Is
Mm.
how do you see reconstituting Border Patrol into something better or
Yeah.
something different? Because we can't train our way out of this with what's currently there. It's a
Yeah.
systemic problem and not a training issue. So what do you see as a good starting point
Mhm.
to um to fix that system?
Yeah, and so like a good example to think about is like anytime you have a total environment, right, where you have people in positions of power, those people have authority on the use of force up to lethal force, and there are a lot of people who feel powerless in comparison to that, right? You know, they have the weight of the state and the authority of the state. Look at a military boot camp, right? If you have a platoon, you typically have 3 to 4 drill instructors, and you know, to the recruits, they're all powerful, right? You know, they're the all powerful and mighty Oz, and they feel relatively powerless compared to the authority of the drill instructor, what's vested in them by the military, the outward symbols of their uniform, the rest of it. And when, you know, I've done enough investigations. I ran the Marine Corps West Coast Drill Instructor Academy for a year. Prior to that, I was a battalion XO at one of the training battalions. And when you had a platoon team go rogue, right, and you had drill instructors who were abusing recruits, there was no remediation for that team. You had to blow the whole thing up and
Yep.
reassign them to other places, court martial some for the ones that were savable. You know, it's usually end up with an NJP. They probably got sat down, went through some additional training, and then we were put into a different unit, right? And I think we need to scale the same thing up because when you have a culture that's built on that, um, you know, you really have to dismantle it down to the foundation and rebuild. I mean, there's really no other way. And you look at a corporation, like if a corporation has a brand that's gone bad, right? We're caught doing something criminal, something unethical, you know, massive pollution. What do? They typically rebrand the entire thing, right? You know, in order to reattract customers, start to rebuild trust and the rest of it. So, you know, uh, you know, but like in its current state, you like, you know, when you have more than half of the country not trusting your federal agency, you're
Yeah.
done. You're done. You're lost, right? Like, um, yeah. So I mean, it takes a concerted effort from the leadership at the top all the way down to the deck plates, and reinstituting new norms, new expectations, new SOPs, hell, even new uniforms, new name, title, everything. I mean, it's just like, um, yeah, because I'm at the point where when citizens are getting executed in the streets by, you know, alleged law enforcement agents, it's just like, what are we doing? You know,
Yeah.
I don't think you can really rebuild trust in those instances. So, I mean, that image of the CBP agent pointing the weapon at Alex Preddy right before he was killed, um, you know, that's not going to go away anytime soon. I think that's going to be kind of like the enduring image of this whole thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I watched that video a lot this
Me
weekend.
too.
I did
Yeah.
a reporting on it on Banner and Backbone for almost 4.5 hours, where we covered the protest. And Zev Shalev and I did an analysis of that video, and he did a really good breakdown later that evening where he slowed it down and he correlated different views. He and I have come together a lot to do like a break the propaganda on
Mhm.
big events like this. When this happened, we come out very quickly and just start analyzing the videos and saying, this is what we've seen, this is what it is. And I think what you talked about earlier was the citizen journalism and the access to phones and information.
Yeah. Thank
um,
God.
thank God. Yeah. Is so using Alex Preddy's murder in this
Mhm.
situation, comparing it to, because there's been conversation about this in our chat, and I want to make sure I bring this up, comparing it to someone, say, like Kyle Rittenhouse, who
Yeah.
murdered two people
Mhm.
and was acquitted for it. That doesn't mean he's not, that doesn't mean he's innocent. It just meant
Mhm.
they didn't find him guilty, because he's
Right.
definitely not innocent. Um, is What do you think about the response that has come out around gun ownership and location and how you can use or handle one? Because Donald Trump was interviewed and said to a reporter he shouldn't have had a gun. He shouldn't have brought it with him.
Well,
He shouldn't
well,
have carried. What do you think about that? Because to me, this is an attempt to take people's guns in the long run that do not align with the regime.
yeah.
And I also want to disarm a lot of society, because I don't think we need so many guns in America. I
Mhm.
don't think everybody needs to have an AR-15 or 14 handguns or 32 fucking rifles and 200,000 rounds of ammunition. I don't think people need to be armed to the teeth on a
Mhm.
civilian level, but I also think that requires law enforcement to de-escalate their units too. So
Mhm.
how do you see that playing into, like, with the overall discussion on guns that is going on right now and the Second
Yeah.
Amendment response?
Yeah, the first thought that leaps into my mind is we didn't hear this objection from Donald Trump when his supporters were storming the Capitol on January 6th, armed, right? We didn't see the same thing when Gretchen Whitmer was threatened by militias in the state of Michigan, right? Where was the objection then? We didn't say the Kyle Rittenhouse thing is another thing came from a different state and inserted himself into a situation he had no business being in.
Yep.
It would have been different if it was like his parents' store that was under attack, right? In his own community, but he traveled across state lines to do that stuff. What January 6th, I think, unfortunately taught a lot of Americans is that to this president, political violence is acceptable when it's done on his behalf, right? And like you, I've done a lot of work in gun violence prevention. I've used firearms in the defense of my own life in Iraq. I know what that looks like and what that feels like. I've worked with survivors of gun violence. I've spoken out on behalf of it. Largely, I agree with you. I think when you have a country that's got more guns than people, man, that's a dangerous mix, especially when you have a lot of untrained people with questionable skills and the rest in judgment. It goes all into play, right?
Yeah.
Um, but we've created a culture of guns in this country. We fantasize about them in our movies. We make gun manufacturers make a shit ton of money every year selling them, and also selling fear, because fear sells more guns, right? So it's in the best interest of gun manufacturers to stoke as much fear about your personal safety and survival on a daily basis that you got your 78-year-old neighbor down the street who feels like they need an AR-15 to defend themselves against, I don't know, um, but and again, it's complicated. I think fewer guns and more de-escalation is the way to go. Fastest way to not get shot, right?
Yeah.
Is that lifelong commitment, and it requires reciprocity and it requires trust. Where you have no trust, people are going to operate on their worst instincts because their brains are in fight or flight mode. They don't have the full capacity to. Their brain loses significant ability to reason when you're in your amygdala is activated, right? Like, so um yeah, and I think it's just insane how we tolerate a lot of this violence, especially with kids. You'd have thought after some of the school shootings that things would have changed. They haven't. And I also understand the argument from folks who are like, yeah, the Second Amendment is there to prevent a tyrannical government from taking over the United States. you know I think a lot of people who were uh, against that 10 years ago now are like, huh, maybe those guys, maybe there's some grain of truth into what they're saying. So
Except all those guys who are yelling, "Take over by a tyrannical government," are the tyrannical government.
That's right. Yeah, and
because they
it's
all
funny.
became ICE agents.
Yeah, and it's funny how guys will go to the mat, on a instant replay on a football game and be like, no, the ball's across the goal line, and then they'll deny what they see with their own eyes in the same video footage from New York Times.
Yeah,
it's crazy, but
it's a crazy world we're living in right now.
Yeah, can we please go back to precedented times? I'm tired of unprecedented times.
Yeah, like I'd love to live through precedented times where we can just relax again and focus on humaning and being a parent or being a good partner, or being a good friend, or just being a good person and just enjoying yourself and being creative. So I like to wrap that into my conversations because that's a huge piece for me. It's like part of breaking down this white supremacy system, or this just supremacy system in general, and this fascist system in general, is the use of masculinity culture and how we can impact that really, really quickly. And so today's show is actions in review. We haven't reviewed many actions overall in a condensed sense of your specific things we've done, but I think we've reviewed a lot of actions that are going on right now in the US with the response by Governor Walz and the National Guard, and how that could influence, or in my view, should influence other governors in their responses and being ahead of these events, and working with groups like the Black Panthers and encouraging your governor to do things like that, is to reach out to your civic groups that are well-armed and regulated militias that have been around for a long time to protect their communities, and go in and ask them, what can we do to help? Or here's what we know that you have been saying. Here's what we want to do to help. Does this work? Is this enough? Does this go far enough to help? And so I think we've reviewed a lot of these good actions. So thank you for this really wonderful discussion, Joe.
Fantastic, man.
My bad. I really enjoy talking with you. This is so much fun. I paused us there for a second.
Okay.
I think the Second Amendment conversation is a really interesting one, and not so much because I think people need to just leave your guns at home unless they're really necessary and you're really well trained. Unless you're trained properly, don't be bringing a fucking gun anywhere because it's dangerous. Right. And if you have one, go get trained so that you at least know how to use it properly, and then go train yourself on it if that's what you want to do. If you don't get one. I'm not pressuring people, and I don't want people to get guns because we don't need more guns. More guns are not the solution.
I agree. My sense is that, and I've said this when I was doing gun violence prevention advocacy, and still do to some degree, but it's true freedom is not being able to take a gun everywhere you go in America. True freedom is not needing to.
Yes.
Right. So it's a pain in the ass. I mean, think about walking around Iraq, Afghanistan, even with a pistol, it's kind of you're always accountable for it. You're always feeling for it. Do I have it? Do I leave it anywhere? Oh, do I have it? It's heavy. It's uncomfortable. Every time you sit down, it's fixing your back. It's kind of it's a pain in the balls to carry a gun everywhere.
It's a drag.
Yeah, it sucks. And especially if it's a long gun, because now you got, 2 hands, you're carrying a sling. It's just it's a fucking mess. It's so much nicer when it's just I've considered my community, and I think my threat assessment is threat's pretty low, and I can go to the grocery store and not need it, right? Some people, I saw one guy walking around our grocery store the other day, open carrying a 9mm, and I'm like, he's out there with his family, well dressed, they just came back from church or something, and I'm like, I can get it, people have shot up churches. Maybe he is one of the people in his church community that is kind of the designated pistolero for that Sunday or something. I don't know, but it was just weird. I wanted to strike up a conversation with him, but I didn't know how it'd be received, and I'll let it go. But yeah, I don't know. So.
Yeah, I think this has been really this is a really useful conversation in terms of how do we approach these situations coming at us, and one of the I had something that was going to be really insightful on what you were saying. Then I got distracted. uh, um, bringing it back to the, I'm trying to think on what I was about to say because I really
Positive
wanted to make that good point.
masculinity was an issue, or
Yeah, it's a positive masculinity piece. Oh, it was about like the freedom. Oh, it's the freedom thing.
yeah,
That's what it was. Is I would love to get your thoughts on, as maybe as like some good closing thoughts on this, is what what it boils down to me in the end is we are talking about the difference between freedom from and freedom to.
yeah,
Like the folks on that believe in they need guns all the time is that they have to have the freedom from something, that they're afraid there's like it's a fear-based freedom.
yeah, oh yeah,
Whereas what we're advocating for is the freedom to do something. And I want
yeah,
to get your thoughts on like that subtle difference in word choice, because I'm all about like I like word semantics
yeah,
and
yeah.
linguistic choices because they make a lot of difference.
Oh,
So what are your
it's how we
thoughts
can.
on freedom from to two?
Yeah, from to two. I think one is if I feel like I've got to carry a gun with me everywhere I go, it's because I've got a overactive amygdala. You know, I'm seeing threats everywhere, and I feel afraid. Ergo, I want to have the means to defend myself. That could go wrong in 100 different ways if you're not trained and prepared. The freedom too, you know, some people might call that Pollyannish or whistling past the graveyard, but like, um, you know, it's just kind of like not feeling like you need to because you have police that uphold the law and also respect the rights of citizens, you know, who are well trained and also uh, well respected. And you have citizens that treat each other well and are willing to step in to help each other out, right? And feel like a community, not like a bunch of strangers walking around. Um, you know, that breeds a sense of safety. And you know, Gaber Mate once said, he said, safety is not the absence of threat, it's the presence of connection, you know. And I believe that, like, where people feel like they are connected with others, they'll do amazing things in risky situations, right? um, but you know, it's all constructed, it's all perceived, and it's all based on largely like what do I expect, and can I accurately predict what's going to happen next in my immediate environment, because that's a hardwired basic human survival thing, right? um, yeah, so I don't know, those are kind of my thoughts on that, but
No, I think that's great.
yeah.
I think having that conversation is important because I think the freedom to
Mhm.
something is that you are free to live a life, to pursue happiness, to pursue
Yeah,
dignity, to, and it's the dream rather than the freedom from is I'm afraid that I need to hold these things or I need to clutch on to this singular idea, like I need to own a gun so that I can be free from tyranny.
yeah,
Well, I am
well,
free to live a life in democracy because we have built a community. In
mhm.
my eyes, is a lot of what you're saying is we become the freedom to live without guns just by
Yeah,
choice. Like we
yeah,
don't have to take guns away to by choice live without guns in our society because we could choose to be a community that doesn't need guns,
yes,
and we could keep them and use them for whatever we want, for hunting, for
hmm,
home defense, for things like that. Like cool,
hmm,
whatever, man. Like keep your guns. I don't care. I'm in the I don't care group
yeah,
for a lot of things. Like you live your life, man. Like I'm a libertarian who turned
uh
into I'm a progressive because I'm a libertarian who learned how to read.
yeah, me too.
And
Yeah, I
that's what
think,
I think is libertarians just haven't read enough books. They're
yeah,
progressives who
yeah,
haven't read books. Um,
yeah,
and Chris Goldsmith sort of embodies that too, because he was like, I
mhm.
was a libertarian too, and then I started reading more, and
Oh yeah,
now I'm not.
yeah.
Um,
It's a great philosophy
and
when you're 12 or 13. It doesn't
yeah,
work so when you're 50, right? Like,
no, no,
and
it
Nick, I've
doesn't.
got a hard back at 12 here. I've got a
Okay, well,
client I
let
got
me
to
give
hit,
you
but
one last
yeah.
moment here. Joe, sell
Okay.
yourself. How can people find, or not say, promote yourself? How can people find your work and what you're doing, and how they can support you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Substack under my name. I'm on Blue Sky under at Saint Terrificus. There's a whole inside family joke with that. And if you're looking for some coaching work, come find me on LinkedIn. So yeah,
Awesome.
be happy to help.
Thanks, Joe. I really
Thanks.
appreciate you coming on with me today, and we'll see you again here soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Joe. And everyone in the audience, thank you for being here with us today. This has been fantastic. I'm going to let Joe drop off here as I close out the show. I'll pull him back there so he can take his time and do what he needs. Thank you for being with us, Joe. Really appreciate it. And for everyone in the audience, thank you so much for being with us. This has been really awesome, really great discussion on positive things we can be doing and actions that we can be pushing for, especially around communications between governors and National Guards and local communities on what they can do to support and what they can do and offering solutions to actually address the problems, because that'll get us out of here. Rather than addressing it with violence, they need to address it with action that is communicable, and Joe really helped set the stage for that. So thank you, Joe, for being with us today. That was really awesome. Please go to subscribe to him. If you're on Substack, hit the Chiron in that top left corner so that you can just free subscribe to Joe. It was so fun to have him. And then while you're at it, come subscribe to me at Sick of This Shit Publications. That's my other home, where I do most of my discussions on masculinity, chronic illness, and community support. So enjoy me over there. A little bit different than over here on the more civic and news focused side. And then support me here at Banner and Backbone. Support us at Banner and Backbone. We're growing an incredible system. We have some really cool launches of stuff that's coming out here soon. There's going to be a community calendar that is coming out very, very soon with affiliate networks and all of our shows listed, so everybody can easily access them, find them, and get to them without having to worry. And you can add them to your calendar so it's easy to track, giving you live updates on show titles, on as well as it's going to be a hub for finding other affiliates and getting support out to them in other areas that are not just on Substack. So help build up their networks. My shirt says, "I'm my mother-in-law's favorite child." Thank you for asking. I am. I love my mother-in-law. Thank you, mother-in-law, for being awesome and loving me so much too. And then finally, as well, support Centered America. They were not able to be here with us today, which is understandable. They were sick, and they helped bring this together. They helped start this. They helped organize the window of discussion. They've been an incredible part of it, and I'm honored to work alongside them and be friends with them and support their work. So please go support Centered America, who helps put on this show and is a big contribution to what we're doing in this part of the community. And then I'll put Banner and Backbone back up just so it's there for visibility as we end the show. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Have a wonderful day. We will be back next week for the window of discussion again as we continue these conversations into building and growing our community in civic action. So again, if you're on Substack, smash that heart one last time before you head out. Have a great day, and you will see me again later or tomorrow on different days as we do our different shows. But window of discussion, we will be back next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time for another great show. Thanks, y'all.